during the break. And one thing I do want to, that I didn't mention earlier, is cuttings should only be taken during the period that the plant is at rest. In other words, when they're in full bloom, forget it. Okay? You're not going to get the results you want. Typically, you want to take those cuttings either before the flower cycle or after the flower cycle. After its growth cycle, then you can take some younger stuff too. Just something to keep in mind. Somebody was also asking me about soil. And I do have a slide on here regarding soil. So basically, soil serves as a medium for supporting the plant growth and development. Okay? So the soil properties that you use should include the following. Water retention, so it's got to hold moisture. Exchange of gas, support the plant roots. And also never, like I told you about the tools, you don't want to skimp on soil. Okay? Soil is very simple. You get what you pay for. If you go down to the sale, where they got like 20 bags for $1, you're going to get $20 worth of 2x4s. Okay? On the other hand, you've got peat moss, core, you're paying $25, $35, $40 a bale. You're getting that kind of product. Okay? Typically, our soils that everybody buys are somewhere in between. And they're all wood-based. And then they blend them, whether it be with peat moss, some vermiculite or perlite. Sometimes in the potting soils they'll add a little bit of sand. And then if you get the organic stuff, depending on who you're buying them from, you'll end up with some sort of a fertilizer package. And what I mean by that, they'll add elements like different types of guano or whatever they feel they need to put in there. And then, just so you know, when you go to the nursery, you look on the bag and you look on the ingredients. It's never going to say so much of this, so much of that. It's just going to list them. But by law, the first item that they list on that bag is what that bag contains the most of. Okay? So if you're buying, just one moment, okay? Otherwise, they just get confused. Otherwise, what will happen is, or otherwise it'll say forest products, then you know it's forest products, right? But on occasion it'll say something like bio something or other. Well, what that means is 2x4s. Okay? So ground up lumber. So always be aware that they're not going to say we've got ground up lumber in here. They're going to say they'll make it pretty. Okay, so just be aware there. Yes, ma'am.
I'm stating the ingredients by their relative amount. Is it by volume or by weight?
It's not listed, okay, but it's typically by volume what they have in it. Yeah, because most of the soils are very light to start with, especially when you get into the peat and the core. Okay. So does everybody kind of understand that? So you'll always end up with soil. It's on two extremes. You got manures on one end, and you got peat and core on the other end. Everything else falls in between. Okay. So if you're paying $10 for a bag, you're getting $10 worth of soil. You're paying $15. You're paying $15. Good potting soil to start plants with, you'll be paying somewhere between $15 and $25. Okay. Just so you know. Any questions on that? Okay. So now we're going to enter our next next method of propagation, and it's called grafting. This is usually one where the students have a lot of fun, and I always take a bunch of Band-Aids with me to school because I know that they're going to cut themselves. What I wanted to point out, before I move it out of her way, I'll put
If
it on
that
the ground.
TV was working, we could look
Does
over
everybody
there.
kind of see this node right here, this kind of weird looking structure?
Yeah.
Okay, does everybody kind of see that?
Yes.
That's called a union or a graft union. Okay, that's where this tree was grafted. So, why do we graft?
Improves root stock.
Huh?
Improves root stock.
Improve root stock, okay.
Disease resistance.
Disease resistance,
Size,
dwarfing,
Age?
more variety.
all correct, okay. Normally, I'm sorry?
I get my fruit faster.
There you go. Why is that?
If I gotta put that thing in the ground with a seed, I have to wait until it's that size before I can even dream about
So normally,
growing my tangerine.
if you're planting from a seed, that plant has to go through all the different stages of growth, right? Baby, juvenile, et cetera, to adulthood before it can reproduce. On the other hand, you're taking a piece of material, tissue, from an adult already. Remember, we're making copies. So regardless of how big that little piece of material is, it's already an adult. So therefore, immediately, once it gets up to size, it's already starting to fruit. Okay? And it'll begin to fruit more and more and more as it develops a larger structure to support the fruit. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when we're grafting, I brought this slide here. This is called tongue and groove, but really the secret to grafting is when we're joining two pieces of tissue, you're uniting them in a manner where they're going to fuse together and grow. So the secret to grafting, it's hard to see on this slide, but typically on most plants or on all plants you have a bark area, and what's underneath that bark?
Cambium.
The cambium. Okay, that is the most critical part of grafting. The two cambium layers, which are right, this is supposed to be in green, by the way. I don't know why. Is that one green over there?
Yeah.
Okay, so those two, that green area is what needs to touch and come in contact. If the cambiums do not come in contact, you are not going to succeed in the graft. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Very, very, very important. That is the secret to grafting. Okay. Now, the various grafts, there's a gazillion out there. Okay. Commercially, the citrus tree are what they call bud grafts. And what is a bud graft? Basically, what they've done is on the tree itself, it's got these little areas where the new leaf is going to come out. They'll harvest the little bud there. So out of this little piece of tissue, they create what they call a T-graft. So they cut it across the top, slit it down the middle, peel it back, and slide this little bud in there and lock it back up. Okay? And that's the way most of these grafts are done. Okay?
Wow.
Try to do that. It's very simply said. Okay? And it's harder than heck to do. Okay? Because getting that peeling back effect that it shows nothing but cambium is very difficult to do. Okay? But these guys do like hundreds of them in a day, or thousands of them, whatever. And commercially, that's what we do. Okay? Or is done. As homeowners, as hobbyists, typically we end up doing, the easiest one for you to do is what we call a saddle graft. And basically, you'll take the wood and it'll come in a triangle like this, and then you reverse this triangle up here.
Okay.
And the two, there's a slot. Does everybody visualize that?
Yeah.
Okay. That's what we do, okay? Because it's easy. The most important thing I can tell you, if you like grafting or if you want to give it a try, is get a knife and sit at home and whittle and practice until that knife becomes part of you. Typically, I give a knife to a student and they're afraid of it. They think they're going to cut off something, okay? And sometimes they almost do, but that's part of life. But nevertheless, get comfortable so that that tool becomes easy for you to do. Now, I told you I mentioned about tools. This is what they call a grafting knife. So as you can see here, single blade, and the blade on this side is for cutting, creating the cut. I was talking about a T-butt. This is what peels back the little levels. And this also does the same thing when you're trying to, sometimes we call it slipping the bark. During certain times of the year, the bark is looser on the tree, and so we're able to peel it back and do that. I'll pass this around. However, as I mentioned before, I got one of these. And for the first time this year, I had the students, some of the students, because I only had one knife, use this. And this was better. Number one, the blade locks. So the idea of that thing coming across and cutting, trapping your fingers, and none of these lock for some reason, and they should. Okay, so this locks. Okay, the blade on here is finer. So instead of when we're cutting, it makes very clean surgical cuts versus a thicker. That particular blade is about double the size of this one. Okay. The other is you never have to sharpen, right? You just take it out, reverse it, and you got a new blade. And then if you don't like that one anymore, you carry more blades.
Right.
So the whole hygiene thing I was telling you about, much easier with this.
Oh, it's right there.
So I found that the simple little blade it's just an all-purpose box cutter basically. And you don't have to buy something this exotic, so to speak. But $2, okay? And oh, I think I bought them at the men's store, the Harbor Freight store or something like that for $1.50 or something. But anyway, just so you know that if you don't feel comfortable with the grafting tool, this is a great tool too, okay? Just a choice. Yes, ma'am.
I've seen another in a different class where it's actually a clipper that it makes a V if you hold it one way, and if you turn it over, it reverses.
Yeah, you got tools that do that now.
So
Yeah, but how many
do those work?
Again, it works. How are you going to make it pay off?
Yeah.
How many cuttings, how many grafts are you going to create before you pay for the tool?
Okay.
So that's the idea behind that. So normally, I just want to show you a couple more things right here. Here's another type of knife here. I don't know if it's open. This is a folding knife, but it's got kind of a hook on it. The idea is, as you get into bigger and bigger wood, the saw, this is also, these little saws here are great for cutting some of the wood. And because keep in mind that many times, I've talked about production here, many times we want to salvage an heirloom. Let's say your grandmother has had this citrus tree growing in her garden for 10,000 years, and you want to take it to your property, and so you're going to graft it. You're going to take a piece of her tree, and you're going to put it on your tree at home, okay, which you can do. And so the idea would be that you're probably going to be harvesting a bigger piece of wood, and then you're going to get it to your house and do it. And so there's different types of grafts that involve not the entire, as I said, the whole piece of wood, but you might be using a portion of that branch. And you can actually do that. Separating the bark, exposing the campion layer, and then putting in the new shoots of grandmother's tree. So you're only doing it a part of the way, okay? So everybody, I've learned enough in this business that everybody has their perfect way of grafting. And only they know how to do it, okay? And that's really baloney. Everybody's got their favorite way of doing it, but different ways work, is what I'm trying to say, okay? I would start out with a simple saddle. One of the best grafts that I showed you up here, this was before, it's called a whip and tongue. And that's this one, because it allows another slit right here. and it locks it in. Because what you're doing basically with this tissue, you're exposing tissue, and it's like when you break your leg. It's got to be set and not move, because that area of cambium layer is very small. So if it shifts on you, due to wind or whatever it might be, it's not going to take. So the more areas that you can have in contact with the cambium layer, the chances of positive results are better. Does that make sense? Okay. So what do we do after we make the graft? Again, the old days you had grafting wax, you had grafting rubbers, etc., etc. Today it's very simple. Get a piece, get a roll of this tape, $1.99. Okay. This is like your cast. Okay. Once you attach this area here, like here, you use something like this. It stretches, and you wrap it and tie it. So you're going to wrap it about 1.5 inches below the graft, 1.5 inches above the graft. So you got a nice tight. And then this stuff here, if the plant decides to grow or do whatever, it stretches with the plant. It's not held in place. So that's number one, the tape. I didn't have any parafilm. Let's see if I took a photograph of it. This is called parafilm. The medical industry introduced this. What it is, it's wax in the form of a tape. Okay, that's all it is. The greatest stuff since sliced bread. Okay, this is like grafting 2.0. You know. Okay? This tape, you can take a little piece and just keep working it with your heat, and it'll begin to stretch. So typically what we do when we graft, we'll attach another section, let's say about 5 or 6 inches of tissue, to what we call the scion. Or, no, I'm sorry, the rootstock. Does everybody know what rootstock and scion are? Yeah. Okay. So the rootstock is there. We've attached a scion to it. We've already tied it with the green tape. Now we have an exposed area, maybe 4 or 5 inches of exposed area. What happens? Potential for disease, not so much. Moisture loss. Okay? So what you do with the parafilm is you wrap that section all the way up and cover it completely. And you can rub it together so that it kind of fuses to it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So all of a sudden you've got protection. You've also creating a little bit of a greenhouse situation. Okay? And you're able to complete your graft. Yes, sir?
At some point, does that stay on it, like the paraffin type, or will you leave the green on and eventually
everything stays on because it breaks. The sun will break all that, especially the parafilm will definitely go, the new buds will shoot right through it. Unless you put it on super thick, and you don't have to put it on very thick. Okay? So the green tape you might have to loosen at some point, maybe cut off, but sometimes it just breaks off. Okay? So green tape and parafilm. That's all you need. The days of the grafting wax, if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, you can melt a little bit of wax on it. The grafting rubbers are the same as that green tape. The neat thing about the green tape is when you tie it, you leave these little tails, right? Well, normally I cut them off because I like to be real neat. However, for you, there's plenty of room there for the Sharpie to write what you grafted. Otherwise, you'll forget. Okay? And that leads me into my next thing that I always stress to my students. One of the projects that they have to do is make a journal. And in this business, and even as a hobbyist, it's very, very important to develop what I call a popcorn trail. In the case of professionals, if you had success once, how do you repeat that success if you don't have any kind of record as to how you do it? Okay, or let's suppose you get fired. How's the next guy going to figure out what you're doing? So you got to leave some sort of a trail as to what you did. So journaling and having a sequence of what occurred is very, very important so that you can have and duplicate the success or make it even better. So get in the habit of taking notes as you're doing something with dates, things like hot day, extremely hot day, or a cool day, rainy day, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be a whole story, but something that you can read or somebody close to you can read so that they can understand what took place. Okay? So that's grafting. Any questions on grafting? It takes practice. Yes, ma'am.
Can you take any branch, or is there a better branch?
Well, normally you want your cuttings, your graft sections to be about the thickness, your scion wood to be about the thickness of a pencil or less. But right about that thickness is good. You get too big and it's too cumbersome, too small, and you can't work with it.
And is green wood better than the older established?
Typically it's going to be semi.
Semi-woody.
Yeah. Okay, so that's grafting. Then we talk about divisions. Before I get into divisions, I'll pass one more tool around. This little tool is for those folks out here who like to steal cuttings. It's in your pocket, you know? And this is a cute little tool. I know who you are. Take little cuttings. But anyway, a lot of times we want something very quick to work on our plants. So I thought I could bring that out. Okay, divisions. It's another aspect of propagation. It's a form of propagation which new plants are not grown from seeds or bulbs, but rather separated from a parent. Okay? Normally we associate division with strappy leaf type plants, right? Like an agapanthus, a clivia, kangaroo palms, anaxanthus, where we divide things, and that's normally the general idea. However, this is a Shasta daisy, and this is an Acacia or a yarrow that also love to be divided. Okay? Now, the division. We do it because we want to make more. But the most important thing to remember in your garden is you divide because you need to. Okay? Hardly anybody who here divides their agapanthus every year. That's what I thought. Okay? How many times do we divide our anaxanthus every year? Nobody does. Right? Why? It's not because it's too hard to dig in our clay. Right? I'm not going to sit there and break my back on these things, right? So normally we never do it. Okay? But it is something that needs to be done. Okay? So, this kind of gives you some ideas on how to do it. But typically, what you want to do is take out a cluster. I call it management. When we planted our agapanthus, our anaxanthus, whatever it is, moreas, we had an idea as to how big we wanted this clump to be. We look at it 5 years later and it's like this, kind of taking over our lawn or whatever. Okay? And although it looks decent, that doesn't mean it's in its most healthiest state overall. If I was to leave this yarrow in this pot, next year it would still be alive. But what you would find is that it would be about this tall, and the center part would be dead, and the new growth would be around the edge of the can. Because they have, I can't even take it out of here. What's your coffee? Look how fibrous this root system is. Okay. Very, very fibrous. Okay. And it just continues to grow and grow and grow. And so what happens, the plant is not going to be healthy. So the idea on these is to divide them. So what do? We basically take this plant and take my little trusty knife, wherever that little knife went to, that little wooden handled knife. I'd saw it into 4 pieces. I'd make it into 4 pieces. And guess what? You got 4 new Achilles. Okay. Have you guys ever noticed that if you look at an agapanthus clump and it's been there for many years, it looks beautiful when you look at it from the outside, but then you go inside it and it's all weird looking and half dead? That's because it's never been divided. And that's typically what happens. They want to be divided. Again, we don't do it, but it is a desire that the plant, in order for it to retain its vigor, is to be able to divide them. So now, from a commercial standpoint, the division of this, again, allows you to have all those wonderful traits of that plant, and you're able to produce something that is already mature and quickly PMO reproduced. Do you have a question over here? Oh, I thought you had a question. So anyway, you're able to produce plants very, very rapidly. Okay? Shasta daisies, same thing here. In fact, I'll pass these out. You can take them out of the pot if you want. Look at this. This is already breaking out of this pot.
Oh, wow.
Look at that. Okay. So you can see that if you leave them in here, or if they're in that same ground, they're eventually not going to be very happy. Okay. And these aren't really root bound. This is like a few weeks of growth. So it's important to recognize that the division is healthy for the plants, but from a commercial standpoint, you can produce a lot of copies very quickly. Yes, ma'am?
So you don't try to kind of untangle gently the roots, you just slice right
I
down?
don't have time. Just get a machete and whack it.
So when the plant's at rest as well? Not
Yes.
in the, okay.
You never do this stuff during its flowering reproductive cycle. You want to wait till it's at rest. Whether it's at fall, sometimes it's in the summer with some plants. Somebody was asking about cuttings, for example. These things here, these plumerias, you can make a lot of money on these here. But the idea is that you let them heal, callus, then you put them in a pot, water them once, and then you kind of forget about them. And then eventually they'll send out roots and so on. But you do it during the rest periods. Okay? So, if you have a cluster like this, you can actually take these apart, okay? And believe me, you'll need a saw in many cases. Yes.
Is there any sign that a plant is well suited to division? I mean, other than the strappy plant?
Typically, fibrous plants, and experience will tell you, you'll see the strappiness, and what happens is the plant will continue to grow, but the center tends to die off. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
If they're actively growing but they're not flowering because they need to be divided, so can you still do it at that stage?
Well, you do it when you have to do it.
Yeah.
But when the plant is at rest, it's its best time. Okay? So you can divide with a knife, divide with a shovel, whatever it takes. I find that the best shovel out there, if you like the long-handled shovels, is what we call a trenching shovel. It's got the little blade like that. Fantastic. Okay. They do make little perennial shovels that are about this big. They have a D handle on them, and those are also great for this type of work. The last area is in vitro, and then what I'll do is I'll kind of open it up for the end of the thing for a lot of questions or whatever. Tissue culture is something that I introduced to the campus about 4 or 5 years ago. And the idea was to just show students that end of the business, because it's that microbiology thing is really working its way into a lot of aspects of the business. And in vitro means that it's in an agar, some sort of a gel like this. And basically what you're doing is you're doing carbon copies in a mass amount. You'll see these little jars. We might be able to get hundreds of little copies of plants out of that little jar. Okay? And then after that, we can take some of those copies and make more copies out of them. And so from a commercial standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. And again, it's something that's come out of the medical field, but it goes back in history as far as the whole concept of tissue culture goes way, way back. Now they're at the point where they're actually taking the tissue, coating it in a gel, and selling it as a seed, where you can actually, they're getting too close to the point where you never have to go to lab anymore. It just goes from this gel into the field, and it's like you're planting seeds. I mean, this is phenomenal. So the whole idea is coming into its own. This is a slide where some of the students are doing this work. We typically work with little pieces of African violet leaves, and we have had some success with those. My room and stuff at the school is not very sterile, so a lot of them end up, 80% of them get contaminated, but, at least we learn, right? But anyway, the medium is typically an agar, and then in addition to the agar, there's a solution that we make. It's a medium of various nutrients that are, they don't list them, so how do I say it? They're kind of top secret, I guess. But there's different solutions for different types of plants that are out there. Not all plants react well to tissue culture. For example, my yellow bird of paradise, I can't seem to tissue that thing. Okay, the yellow clivia that I showed you does not tissue very well, but other plants are very easy to tissue. But keep in mind that it's designed for high-value plants, not something that you can grow from seed or from a cutting. Okay. Any questions on in vitro? There is a process involved. Like I said, we have to cook the agar to get it into like a jello form. And at the time we cook it, it gets hard. And then what the students do is they take the tissue and they start sticking it in the various little cups and stuff. So it's another way of propagation. Just so you understand that. It's not typically something we do in the industry. And then basically I come from Mission Hills Nursery. If you're on Facebook, like us on Facebook. Can we have the lights? I'd like to open it up to specific questions that you might have regarding anything we discussed.
Okay.
Same time.
Yes, sir?
Yes. Birds of Paradise, splitting those.
Uh-huh. That's the way you do it. That's
Okay.
the best way to do it.
Just shovel and split out.
A machete, I mean, those things are hard to divide, but yeah, you always want to make sure when you're dividing plants, like I showed you up here, it's important that when you divide, that they have a little bit of root with them. If you take it without any roots, you're not going to succeed. So it's got to have a root system with it. Anybody else?
Same with Cymbidium.
Cymbidiums, yes. The thing about cymbidiums is that, have you guys noticed that they've got those like bulbous form things? Okay. So typically they like to be pretty tight in their pot. However, as the plant matures, you'll notice that some of these bulbous things begin to dry out and stuff. So normally, I think it's in they bloom in late winter. So probably late summer, you would do your dividing. And normally when you divide them, that next season, you might not get the same production out of them because they got to grow back into they like to be tight. And so you might not get the same production that following season, but eventually it'll start again. Okay. And those are terrestrial orchids, right? No, they're, yeah, the terrestrial orchids. So they need a soil mix, not just bark. Okay. Yes.
I just got a fern from my neighbor.
Okay.
I don't know what kind of fern it is. It's beautiful. And it's got that really hairy, furry, what do you call it?
Legs.
A rhizome? I'm not sure what you
Is
call
that
it.
the asparagus fern?
No, it's not an asparagus.
Rabbits?
Oh,
Rabbits?
I don't know.
The legs kind of hang off and they have brown hairs?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay,
the
that's a
rabbit.
rabbit
Beautiful.
foot.
So to propagate that,
Just the cuttings. I mean, that's
of
a
what
root.
though? Of that
That's a
rooting?
root. It's an aroid. It's a.
So of that
it's
furry
it's an
thing,
aerial
chop it?
root, yeah.
Stick it in the ground?
Well, in soil.
Yeah. And, okay. It's that easy. I don't need anything for photosynthesis, is what I mean. I'm just,
No,
it's like a,
typically on that section of root, there's little ferns on it. Right?
not the section I got. There's one leaf coming off and one little,
Yeah, because normally on those rabbit foots is you cut a little section, just like that little piece of wire vine that I passed around. You'll get a little section of fern, put that into the ground, and it'll have various little sections of fern coming up. And once they root, you can actually cut them, and then you got individual plants. So if that is what you have.
if it's, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So you said when you were talking about the cymbidiums that you would do it in the fall. And what were you thinking about? If we're going to divide, it should be well after they
Again,
bloom?
you do all, okay, when you do all this stuff to plants, you're hurting them. They're saying ouch. Okay? You're messing with the tissue. So it's best to do it when it's at rest. Okay? Whether it's not the flower cycle, whether it's in a dormant state, whatever it might be. Because your chances of success are going to be great. You don't have a plant that's trying to bloom and fruit while you're cutting its legs off, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I would have thought with the cymbidiums you would do it after the flower, but it seems like
And
you
that's
wait
after
longer.
the flower, but what happens after a plant flowers?
Let's have more leaves.
It starts growing. So you want to wait till after the growth period is over, then it enters its state of rest. And by then it's probably close to fall. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
So as for succulents, we get pups, we take out the pups, we generate the pups. So let's say that you have a succulent that, like a Jurassic or something, that the pups are on the edges of the leaves or they sprout off and there's pups on either side. So I know you can take those off, put them in the soil, and if I'm very lucky, they grow, but most of the time they don't. Is it best to cut off the succulent, the main parent of that, since it's going to die anyway, and then try to regenerate the smaller pieces? Because I've seen people try and I don't know how to help.
I mean, all I can tell you, I don't know which one you're necessarily referring to, but succulents. Again, it's one of those plants, you cut it off, throw it in the air, if it lands, it'll grow. I mean, but understand that from a propagation standpoint, leaf cuttings, stem cuttings, I even go through the students and we chop the leaves into 4 pieces and we plant those to show them that they work. Okay, so typically from a cutting standpoint, most succulents are going to be successful. Faster than seeds, faster than anything else. Sometimes they have the little nodes, like there's a succulent out there called Mother of Millions. Have you guys seen that thing? And it's got all these tiny little leaves that come on, you barely look at them and they fall off, and then they grow like crazy, you know what I'm saying? So there is that type of succulent out there that is very vigorous, that grows very fast. I would have to know more a little bit about the one you're trying to describe.
I'll talk to you after.
Okay, but there should be a way to do it. But typically, if you go to the stalks, you can either divide a branch off it,
Yeah, I've tried.
or you can take the leaf and do that. Which leads me to one more little thing I got here. The largest category of plants in the world, bromeliads. Okay, these are Tillandsias. And again, you can see that we sell these for $5, $6, and all they are is little things that they took apart. If you want to get into business, I mean, this is a good one. This is such a cool plant because they're all different. They grow. They grow in the desert. They grow in the jungles. They grow anywhere. Okay, there's different varieties. The largest bromeliad category in the world is what? Anybody know? Pineapples. Okay. And everybody all over the world. And I was in Baja a few years ago, and some guy told me, go out to the desert, there's a beautiful waterfall, and you'll love it, and on and on and on. So me and my wife went out driving out in the middle of nowhere, and we finally found this particular waterfall, and it was gorgeous. But I'm a nurseryman, so I always have to look for plants. And so I'm out there traipsing around in this water, and I look up, and we're surrounded by these huge boulders, and it's like 100 degrees plus, and covering these boulders is these mats of tillandsias. Full hot sun, 100 degrees plus, and they're just like happy campers, you know. So, I mean, it's a very, very tough plant. If you like doing something unusual, something fun, tillandsias is the way to go. Anyway, if there's any other questions, I got a little, yes?
What about air ferns?
Air ferns. Are you talking about that little weed that they sell?
No, they hang, they look like witch's hair.
Spanish moss?
Spanish
Like
moss?
They look like moss. Oh.
Well, Spanish moss is a plant.
No, but they have little blue flowers when they, once in a while, but they're air ferns.
It's Spanish moss, isn't it?
Well, but they don't, it doesn't flower. It could be a version of tillandsia with little blue flowers.
Oh, yeah.
But not it's not in the ground.
But they call it an air fern.
Yeah, typically they're aeroids, so they grow like Phalaenopsis orchids. Typically you'll see them in nature. They're growing in the crotches of trees, the branches. The root systems are nothing more than an anchoring device, and then they live off the nutrients that come off the tree or the rain or whatever. Typically, most of those plants are not, what's the word, like daughter that kills the host? It's not a parasite.
Can they be propagated though?
Yeah, I mean, you can take little sections and propagate it. But yeah, all those you can do just as long as you provide the right conditions. Yes?
I have another question about conditions too. I haven't heard you say anything about creating a greenhouse. You talk about spritzing and spraying them, but at home, should we cover them with anything?
Again, it's where you live, okay? But yes, if you have a controlled, all propagators have a controlled environment of some sort, a greenhouse, okay? Depending on how much money they have and how extensive you want to do it, it could be controlled with various mechanisms, or it could be just a sheet of plastic over a PVC pipe, okay, and provide that. But many times with some of the older cuttings and stuff you take, you don't really need that. Maybe a shady spot, you know, if you're doing it during the warmer months of the year. If you're doing it in the winter, of course, you're going to need some. Yes, one last one back there.
So when you're listing the cuttings, are you missing the soil or the
Both.
plants themselves?
Both. Because the little plants are, you know, transpiring, but you also want to keep the soil moist. Okay?
Professor, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.